Elizabeth is at the Hoover Library in West Branch, Iowa, and we're going to go roll on here all the way into lunch. So it's all yours, Elizabeth, and great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. All right. Well, since we're not going to give huge introductions, I can at least put up my bald eagle for you guys. So we are going to do something different because we're all learning how to like teach and learn in the online space, right? So I actually want to open up where we're going to do an activity to start because I think activities are fun. So let's see if we can move on here. Yeah. All right. So we're going to go into breakout groups. There's going to be 8 groups we're breaking out into, and each group is going to get either one like longer letter or a small document set. And I want you to close read these documents with your group. And you'll have a Jamboard that you'll have access to and the links that Therese and I will come in and we'll drop them into your chat. And be ready to discuss the documents. I'm not giving you guys any context. You can use any prior knowledge that you have. But the topics we're going to look at are the Hoover Dam, Prohibition, unemployment, and the bonus march. And all of these have some element of conflict with the Constitution, or the Constitution is used to solve a problem. So make notes of that on your Jamboard. And then we're going to go through and I'm going to talk about these individual topics, and we'll bring you guys in to tell us what your group talked about and to share your Jamboard. So have a spokesperson ready. Have a spokesperson ready. Every time I do this with teachers, they show up and we're like, no one's ready to talk. Pick someone to talk. All right, so someone's going to talk. We're going to send you guys to the breakout rooms now, and either Therese or I will drop in to give you the links to the Jamboard and the documents you guys are going to read.
All right, here we go.
And that's okay, because we are going to talk about a lot of stuff. So we will keep going over here. Let me share my screen. I was just telling Therese, like, we've been giving presentations online for a super long time, but you guys had to like adjust to doing that and then teach kids how to learn in the same environment that you were also learning how to teach in. And I wanted to strangle my own child at home. So major hats off to all of you guys who had to deal with teaching online and trying to keep your kids engaged, because it's been wild for the last year, this school year and half of last school year. So, all right. We are going to start with the Hoover Dam and the Commerce Clause, because I'm trying to move somewhat chronologically. And this comes because Hoover was the Secretary of Commerce from 1921 until 1929. And Hoover viewed flood control as a vital issue. It was one of Hoover's first proposals as Secretary of Commerce, was to build a dam in the Colorado River at the Boulder Canyon. And in addition to the essential flood control, the dam would make possible the expansion of irrigated farming in the region. It would also provide a dependable supply of water to Los Angeles and other Southern California communities. And we can see even right now, there's a huge drought in the West. And the reservoir behind the Hoover Dam, Lake Mead, is the lowest it's ever been. So like even back then, they were confronting some of these same issues where they needed to make sure that they could get water to the Western states. So the Colorado River Commission was founded by Hoover in 1922 to resolve interstate claims to water and electricity that would come from the building of a dam. And these water wars ensue because everybody wants access to water, right? So it's Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. The commission meets in Santa Fe, New Mexico in January of 1922. And they come to this Hoover Compromise. They divide the area, you can see the map up here, into the upper basin and the lower basin. And on November 24th, 1922, they signed an agreement. The commission met for 2 weeks, 10 hours a day, arguing just about these water rights. The division of water would be agreed upon later, but the Colorado River Compact and agreement signed, was later ratified by individual state legislators and became official on June 25th, 1929. And then it was signed by the newly elected president, Herbert Hoover. So Hoover goes to the dam. This is a picture of him at it. And we know Hoover and FDR don't get along, right? So this is like the issue of warring presidents, because FDR got to dedicate and open the new dam. And of course, he didn't want it to be named Hoover Dam, which is a whole nother issue. But this is Hoover. This is the Hoover Dam. This is Herb and Lou, and they're there obviously at night. And Hoover delivers a speech. And this is one of the quotes from the speech. And I gave the groups that worked on the Hoover Dam the very readable version of the speech, because the other version is typewritten and not great. So will my people who worked on the Hoover Dam speech unmute themselves and tell me a little bit about what you guys found in that speech? Hoover Dam group.
It seemed like he laid out just all the reasons he had been part of the commission, and the reasons why it was necessary, and how they had used an aspect of the Constitution that had never really been used to that scale before, dealing with establishing treaties between states. And then he kind of just goes through all the reasons as to why it was necessary to have such a large structure.
Does the other group want to add anything? All right. So yeah, this is an excerpt of it. And he says this was accomplished after 3 years of negotiations. It was the first time that a provision in the Constitution of the United States for treaties among the several states was utilized on such a great scale. And he talks about it being ratified by these different states. But I think the reason that I like this speech to understand how these negotiations went is because Hoover has the benefit of hindsight at that point. The negotiations are over, the compact has been signed, the dam has been dedicated by FDR, and here he is standing on the edge of this dam, and he gets to talk about the process of how they made it possible. And now you know why it's so cool that it's named after Hoover, because he had been a part of it even from before the time he was Secretary of Commerce. He was one of the original surveyors of where the dam would go in the 1800s as a young surveyor. It's one of the cool documents we show to kids. So next, we're going to talk about Prohibition and the 18th and 21st Amendments. At 12:01 a.m. on January 7th, 1920, it became illegal to produce, transport, or sell intoxicating beverages anywhere in the United States. Of course, we call that Prohibition. The ratification of the 18th Amendment to the Constitution in January of 1919 and the passing of the National Prohibition Act, known as the Volstead Act, effectively closed every single bar, tavern, and saloon in the country. The amendment, at first, it seemed to work. Public drunkenness fell, alcohol consumption had dropped by 30%, and it was looking like it was going to work out, right? But the problem was that there was a huge surge in crime that correlated with the passing of the 18th Amendment. And people became violent towards police. Of course, there was a rise in what they called vice and organized crime. We saw the age of gangsters open up. So it became very difficult for the federal government to enforce these laws, these federal laws that came down prohibiting alcohol. So in 1929, May, President Hoover appointed George Wickersham to head the National Commission of Law Observance and Enforcement, also known as the Wickersham Commission. In 1929, you have to remember there's no Miranda protections, so there's widespread claims of police beating people up, torturing them, and squeezing confessions out of them, as they would call it. Towards the end of the commission's tenure in 1931, they reported that people did not want prohibition, enforcement was too difficult, and corruption was too widespread. The report also publicly scorned the police for not arresting and capturing and investigating criminals. And some of this is because the police were also corrupt during this time. You could buy the police, right? This is something we at least know in our like national folklore. So I gave our prohibition groups 2 different documents. And it's interesting. It's always interesting when we get letters from the NAACP because the NAACP gives us this like different perspective of how they're seeing things. And law enforcement, even during Hoover's time, was very contentious. And Black Americans felt like they were completely overlooked in being a part of law enforcement. And they also had questions about why certain things were being enforced, like the 18th Amendment, but things like, let's say, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment weren't being enforced equally. And this is something the NAACP loved to talk about and loved to remind Hoover about all of the time. The letters from Walter White are absolutely fascinating. So they got an excerpt. So do any of my prohibition groups want to unmute themselves and tell us about what you saw in these 2 different letters?
The first letter, it seemed the NAACP was wanting to be represented on this commission. They felt since they made up 10% of the population and the prohibition had an impact on African Americans that they should have someone representing them on the commission. The second document that we looked at was one that was asking for Wickersham to basically be fired or at least muted for his proposal of having a commission that would divide up the responsibilities for the enforcement of prohibition among the federal and state and local governments. So he was adamantly opposed to that proposal. Didn't want to make changes to prohibition. I think they'd probably pretty much kind of given up on prohibition working at that point and didn't want to make any changes to try to ratify or make it more effective. So that's kind of what we concluded.
Does the other group want to add anything? No? All right, then we shall go to the next slide here. So Hoover went on to refer, in hindsight, of course, to prohibition as a noble experiment. Noble because he hoped it would help preserve families, but an experiment because it ultimately failed. When the Great Depression really started to settle in, then people thought if they repealed the 18th Amendment, it would bring jobs back because we could produce and sell liquor and open saloons and bars and stuff again. Hoover maintained his support for prohibition all through the 32 campaign, and the Democrats supported the repeal of the 18th Amendment. And of course, it was repealed by the 21st Amendment on December 5th, 1933, after Hoover left office. And the wet versus dry candidate was actually one of the big issues in the 32 election. So now we're going to move on to one of my favorite topics, the bonus march and the First Amendment. So on May 2nd, 1922, a Hearst newspaper truck from New York City delivered a petition to the US Capitol that had more than 1 million signatures in support of a bonus for World War I veterans. The document said, "We respectfully petition Congress to pass the Soldiers' Bonus Act without further delay and also to levy a sales tax to obtain the money to pay the bonus." The advance was vetoed twice before Hoover became office. So this is an old issue when Hoover becomes president. At this point, veterans could borrow up to 22.5% of the face value of their bonus certificates. In 1931, Congress upped that amount to 50%. And some members of Congress supported a 100% payout of the veterans' bonus. In May of 1932, Walter Waters, an Army veteran, proposed that every veteran head to Washington, D.C. to demand their bonus. The movement picked up steam. They decided that on the opening day of Congress, December 5th, 1932, that would be the day they would arrive in D.C. Numbers varied anywhere from 8,000 to 25,000 bonus marchers that showed up. They picked people up along the way. They came from all over the country. They brought women, they brought children, and they set up camps in Anacostia Flats in Washington, D.C. They occupied empty buildings. You can see what some of these campsites looked like here and here. Flags, good fun stuff. They set up newspapers, but there was this like overtone that some of these people were probably communists and agitators and criminals, and they were there coming to undermine the veterans and what they were doing. So this is also like playing out in the background of these people showing up. But Hoover actually believed that they were veterans, even though he was advised by his advisors to send in the military and bust up the camps. President Cleveland had done the same thing 38 years before, so there was a precedent for it. But Hoover really believed that they were veterans and that they had the constitutional right to peacefully assemble. So on June 15th, the House of Representatives passed a bonus bill by a vote of 211 to 176. The Hoover Republicans opposed the bill because they wanted a balanced budget. Hoover threatened to veto the bill. The Senate voted on June 17th. More than 8,000 veterans gathered in front of the Capitol to wait for the vote. Police raised the Anacostia drawbridge to keep back more than 10,000 veterans. Around 9:30 p.m., Senate aides called for Waters, the leader of the bonus march, to tell him that the bill had been defeated. Most of the protesters went home. They left. Hoover offered them interest-free loans on their bonus to return home, to buy train tickets and go. So this is what it looks like when they send in police to tell the bonus marchers that it's time to go home. You can see we're having some squabbles here, right? Some pretty nasty stuff is going on. And then these are where our documents come in for this. So where's my bonus march, people?
Right here.
All right, so what did you guys find out in these documents that you guys had?
Well, we had 3 letters, all dated July 28th, which is kind of interesting that they go boom, 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 boom. The first, the one that is on the screen here, actually comes from the president of the Board of Commissioners of the District of Columbia, basically asking the president of the United States to send in federal troops to stop the conflict and the chaos that is going on. The second document is a transcription of Hoover's statements. He's disappointed very much in the chaos, and actually refers in one of the paragraphs to the fact that some of these persons are not, in fact, veterans and they are communists and persons with criminal records, which, given what Elizabeth just said, might be one of the first times that he actually kind of said, no, we got to get rid of them because they're not veterans. And then the third document, the time is 2:55 p.m. It is a memo to Douglas MacArthur, basically saying, take the troops into DC, cooperate with the district police. You should follow their orders, prisoners turned over to civil authorities, but also be kind to and don't involve any women and children who may be involved in this. The discussion we had, I think pretty understandably, kind of went to, does the president have the right to call out those truths or those troops in this type of a context? And we found ourselves making comparisons to January 6th. And what's going on. I'm not sure we ever came to a complete resolution on that. But I do think that the majority of us thought, well, since DC asked the president to send in the federal troops, Hoover had the right to send them, even though it was a provocative action that ended with the images that all of us have seen.
And I love this part of Hoover's, that Congress made provision for the return home of the so-called bonus marchers, who for many weeks have been given every opportunity of free assembly, free speech, and free petition to the Congress. So he cites the First Amendment in that they have this right to do this, but then they become unruly. They attack the police and stuff. So yeah, so I mean, this is really the conflict is now it's a First Amendment issue. Does the second group have anything that they want to add to it? All right. We're not talkers today, guys. It's not even after
Well,
lunch.
I will
That was a
say,
pretty thorough treatment of it. So no.
yeah, they did talk about how he had given him multiple opportunities to enjoy their First Amendment rights to petition Congress and speak and protest, and now he was done with that.
Yeah. Yeah. In another letter that I did not give you guys, he says that no citizen has the right to make the government fear the people, which is crazy. And so this happens, they send in the military and they're tear gassing World War I veterans. So you can imagine how this played out in public perception. And this is actually the point where FDR says, this just won me the election. That's how bad it was played out in public perception. And so here's the camp before on the left and after on the right. The camp was burned down. General MacArthur says, well, we didn't burn it down. It was the bonus marchers that burned it down on the way out. And then I had the rest of them burned to keep people safe. And so we don't actually know what happened. But this is definitely the aftermath, and it was bad. And people still say Hoover called the military on veterans. So like this had long-term impact on Hoover's reputation. So next we're going to unemployment. There's 2 unemployment groups, and each unemployment group actually got a different letter to look at because they were both long and kind of dense. I think maybe someone said they didn't get to look at theirs. But unemployment had been increasing year over year when Hoover took office. By 1932, unemployment was almost 24%. It is important to remember there's no social safety net. So we're talking no social security, no welfare, no food stamps, no way for people to get help when they're unemployed. They're completely dependent on the community chest, just like you see in Monopoly. That was a real thing, right? There were some unconstitutional proposals made by Congress to solve the unemployment crisis. So these are the 2 letters. This is the first letter that we have. Where's my NAACP unemployment group?
Hello, that was our group. However, we got it so late that we only got to read
We're here.
Okay,
2 paragraphs.
that's fine. I will share it with everybody because this is one of the most remarkable letters I have ever found in our archives.
Thank
There was
you.
actually a proposed law in Congress called the Costigan-La Follette Bill. I guess I'm pronouncing that correctly. That wanted to force Black Americans who had moved in the Great Migration from the South to the North to get onto trains and go back to the South. Think about that for a second. They wanted to forcibly remove Black Americans from the North back down to the South. And there's all these opinion pieces coming out, and it's covered in the press. And so Walter White writes Hoover, and he says that, you can't return people back to where they came from because you feel like it. Everybody has the right as Americans to move around and live their lives as they see fit. And they made this argument that Black Americans would be better off in farming communities from which they came. And of course, they completely say that's not true. This is not constitutional. They talk about it being economically unsound because Black Americans were doing jobs that white Americans did not want to do in the North. And they remind them all the time that we have a powerful Black press, we have a powerful Black following, and we will destroy you in the elections if you try to pass these kinds of nonsensical laws. All the time. Every single one of Walter White's letters reminds Hoover of that. And so they wield this power. This law obviously did not pass, but just kind of let that sit with you for a minute, that was actually a proposed bill in Congress. So the second letter was from the US Attorney General. Did my second group get to read this one? It's long. I don't know if you guys got access to it in time.
No, we got
No.
through just the first part of it's all.
Okay. So Hoover writes to his attorney general and they want to establish national unemployment insurance. And he writes the attorney general and says, is this legal? And at this point, there's already been a House bill and a Senate bill that has passed. And now this is up for Hoover to sign into law. And so what the attorney general tells Hoover is that it is not constitutional, that this is a power reserved for the states. And if you sign this bill, it's just going to waste astronomical amounts of money in having to undo whatever you start to set up. And this is why our unemployment to this day is ran through state governments and not national governments. So states had to set up individual unemployment insurance boards. And so when Hoover pocket vetoed this, he gave a small speech about it and said, I couldn't do it, I'm sorry. But this is one of the things that kind of combats the idea that Hoover didn't do anything to try to solve the Great Depression. It's not that he didn't want to, it's that he legally could not. The Constitution had tied his hands on this, and that's what his attorney general was telling him. And he talks about police powers belonging to state legislators and so on and so forth. And I'm going to give you guys this letter. We use this letter not just for this, but for the Advise the President that I know some of you have done with me, because this was one of the things that guided Hoover's process or decision making while he was president and trying to grapple with unemployment. And this is just that last page. So I think we're even ending on time, even though we started late. Yes. My email address is up there. My Twitter handle is on there. Sometimes I tweet funny things. Sometimes I don't tweet at all. Sometimes my tweets get removed. I had one removed the other day. I don't even tweet anything bad. I never understand why they get removed. But I'm going to drop all of these documents into a folder, the PowerPoint, and then for each one of these topics, I actually have either recorded student sessions, definitely there's student PowerPoints I'll send to you guys, and more documents that you can sift through that help tell these stories, not just as a narrative, but how so often the presidency comes up to the boundaries of the Constitution and they have to figure out where they're going to cross the line and how it's checked. So thank you guys for having me again. Hopefully that was somewhat engaging for being an online presentation. I wish you guys luck for next year. Hopefully we'll be back in classrooms.
And any questions, you can either unmute or you can use the chat, either one for any questions.
Yeah, Elizabeth, Michael Harkins here. Do you know on the NAACP letter, did Hoover respond to the letter?
No.
And if he did, no response?
He usually didn't respond to the letters. Usually what the NAACP would get back would be like a very bureaucratic response from the presidential secretaries that would say, we have received your letter dated such and such. I will inform the president of your concerns. However, with that said, more often than not, which this is what really surprised me, there would be a confidential dispatch between the secretary to Hoover saying, this is going on and you need to deal with it because this is at stake. And so they were absolutely paying attention, and the NAACP definitely had some power in like wielding votes. And remember, Hoover was a Republican and they were still winning the Black vote at this time. So that was a really important voter demographic for Hoover to keep happy.
Is there evidence that Hoover actually, saw the letter and read it or was briefed on the letter?
No, not unless we got one of those confidential dispatches, but we didn't get one on this one. There was a few other ones that we got them for,
Okay.
but
Do we know how many NAACP letters were sent to President Hoover?
No, and actually, I'm glad you say that because that's something that I'm working on right now is going through those NAACP letters because I think they're like scattered throughout the archives, by subject. So there's like NAACP letters on unemployment and on housing and labor and stuff like that. And I think that we need to curate those because I think we have so much NAACP history in our archives during a really important time that I think we have to share it with the public. So it is something we're working on.
Last question, has that letter ever been published in its entirety in any academic publication or journal article?
Not that I know of. That doesn't mean it isn't, because I also don't know if we're the only ones that have copies of it or if there's also copies at NAACP offices. I try to share the NAACP letters and tag the NAACP in them on Twitter so that people can start using them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Great questions there. That was really good. There was one not necessarily related to your presentation. John asked if the Hoover Library is now open.
Yes, it's really limited. We have the time ticket entry, so you have to get a ticket before you come, and then you have like a time you're allowed to be at the museum.
Any other final questions? Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
No problem.
Just like Josh this morning, I learned so much every time I hear from you guys. So it was really great segue. And I think Therese tweeted out this morning, this was a day of crises. So
I did.
Andrew and I are going to pick that up after lunch, actually.
And on behalf of the Hoover Library, thank you to Truman for renaming the Hoover Dam the Hoover Dam.
This is true. That is a good way to finish. I like that. No, that was really great to cover all those topics. And thank you, teachers, for your patience with the sharing of those and things. But I think we got through everything really well. Thank you, Elizabeth, so much.